All right, so we're diving into I Am Legend.
Okay.
And,
Right.
everybody thinks vampires right.
Right.
But this isn't the Will Smith movie. I mean, this is the book, the Richard Matheson novel.
Yeah, yeah.
And you gave me like a stack of sources on this thing, and this is not just like a monster story,
No, not at all.
There's a lot more going on here.
Yeah, it's really about what it means to be human, right? Like in that sort of like existential way.
Yeah.
When you're the last one left or you think you're the last one left.
Yeah, when you're the last man standing, what does that even mean?
Exactly.
So right off the bat, Matheson throws us into this really eerie daily routine with Robert Neville.
Yeah. It's almost jarring, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got this guy, he's like making coffee, choosing his frozen dinners,
Building stakes
yeah.
to kill vampires.
It's like he's just trying to live a normal life in this completely insane world.
You would think that survival at that point is purely instinct, but he's like clinging to these routines.
It's like a lifeline.
Why is that? Is it just order?
I don't think it's just order. I
Yeah.
think it's like his grip on his own sanity.
Okay.
Like just imagine the mental strain of that kind of silence all the time.
Yeah.
The constant fear.
Yeah.
Those little tasks, they become huge.
Yeah.
They're these anchors to his humanity.
Right. Like if I can convince myself that some things are still normal, then maybe I'm not,
Exactly. You're not totally on.
Yeah.
You haven't lost it completely.
And speaking of clinging to the familiar, he also starts out with all the classic vampire defenses. Garlic, steak. You said over some fascinating research on like the history of vampire lore.
Yeah. It's so interesting to look at how those legends evolved.
Yeah.
Before we had microscopes and germ theory and all that,
Right.
people explained the unexplainable through superstition.
Right.
Garlic keeps away evil spirits, stakes through the heart, stop the undead.
It's like this need to make sense of things that we don't understand.
Exactly.
So Neville, even as a scientist, he still kind of falls back on this folklore at first.
Right.
But then there's that aha moment with the garlic
Yeah.
where he realizes, wait a minute, there's a real reason this affects them.
There's a scientific basis for it.
Yeah.
It's not just superstition.
It's like a light bulb moment.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's when his scientific method kicks in. He sees those old stories had a little bit of truth,
Okay.
but not the whole picture.
Okay.
So he's got to experiment. He's got to observe. He's got to go deeper.
And this drive to understand this like imposing order on this chaos, it leads him to this connection with the dust storms.
Oh, yeah, the dust storms.
He starts to think that they're tied to how fast the plague spread.
Right, because it couldn't have just been
Right.
the vampires themselves.
And that's where his trusty microscope comes in.
Of course.
And he finds the bacillus.
The culprit.
And you can almost feel the weight of that discovery on him.
Absolutely.
It's like relief, but also this crushing realization.
Right, he's got knowledge, but what can he do with it?
Yeah.
He's got no power to act.
And speaking of crushing blows, let's talk about the dog.
Oh, the dog.
This little creature just wanders in, and there's this glimmer of hope.
Right.
And it's rough to read because you see how desperate he is for connection.
And it all ties back to that human need for routine.
Okay.
For something to hold on to something familiar.
Yeah.
That dog becomes his anchor.
Wow.
The symbol of the life that's lost,
It's almost like a surrogate for Kathy.
Exactly. His daughter,
Yeah.
the one he lost to the plague
Yeah. It's like Matheson's reminding us that even the smallest lights can be snuffed out.
in this new world. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough world out there.
Tough world. And just as quickly as he finds that connection,
It's gone.
it's shattered.
Yeah.
The dog gets infected,
Just like Kathy.
and it's heartbreaking.
It really is.
It makes you wonder if anything can survive in this world.
Yeah. And it leads to this really important observation that Neville has. Okay.
About the vampires, he keeps saying they have like diminished capacity.
Right. Less than human.
Less than human, exactly.
He even says that only a few of them, like Ben Cortman, seem to have their full intellect.
Right. He sees that as the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
And that assumption right there,
Yeah.
that's important because it's about to be challenged big time
Okay.
when Ruth shows up. Talk about a turning point in the story.
Right. This woman walks into his life.
And suddenly all those walls he's built up,
Years of isolation.
they start to crumble.
He goes from this hardened survivor to like this awkward dude who can't even make eye contact.
Yeah, it's like he's forgotten how to interact with other people.
Well, yeah, he's been telling himself for years that everyone else is a monster.
Right.
So, of course, he's suspicious of it.
Yeah, you can't blame him for being cautious.
Right. But at the same time, you see him wrestling with these instincts
Yeah.
These defense mechanisms he's built up.
It's like he's trapped in this cage of his own making.
And it's a cage that fear built.
It makes you think about how trauma can really warp your perception of the world.
Totally. He's built his whole reality around this narrative.
Yeah.
He's normal. Everyone else is the infected other.
And then Ruth comes along and just blows that whole narrative wide open. And then she drops the bombshell.
Right. She's infected.
But she's managing it with medication.
With medicine. Can you imagine?
So her people have found a way to live with the bacillus.
A whole society.
Neville's whole world just gets flipped upside down.
Talk about a reality check, right?
It's like that confirmation bias we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
He's so focused on being right about everything.
And clinging to his version of reality.
That he misses crucial information.
He can't see the forest for the trees.
And this is where I think I Am Legend becomes more than just a vampire story.
Okay, I like that.
It makes you question what it even means to be human.
That's a big one.
Is it just about biology? Or is it something more?
It's about connection and empathy and understanding.
Yeah. And those are the things that fear and isolation have stripped away from Neville.
He's so busy focusing on the differences, the us versus them.
That he can't see the potential for something else.
Yeah.
And this all leads up to his final tragic choice.
Okay.
He gets this letter from Ruth explaining more about this new society.
Trying to rebuild.
But also struggling with their own internal conflicts.
It's not a utopia.
And remember Ben Cortman.
The vampire Neville thought was different.
Yeah, the one with intelligence.
Right. He's a part of this new society.
Right.
Trying to bridge the gap between the infected and Neville.
So he represents the possibility of coexistence.
Exactly. Understanding.
And then, of course, it all goes wrong.
Tragically wrong.
Neville sees Cortman get killed by his own people.
Branded a traitor for trying to reach out.
And you can just feel Neville's hope shattering in that moment.
It's like the last nail in the coffin.
This man who he saw as proof that not all vampires were monsters.
Killed for trying to create a dialogue.
What does that say about fear?
It's a powerful force.
And it pushes Neville to a place of despair.
He gives up.
He chooses to surrender.
He sees the futility of fighting.
But it's too late. They don't even try to understand him. They just see a monster.
He's a threat to be eliminated.
After all this time trying to hold on to his humanity,
trying to survive,
he becomes the thing he fears the most.
The boogeyman.
The legend.
The thing they tell stories about to scare each other.
And it all comes back to fear, doesn't it?
Always.
The fear of the unknown.
The other.
We can't understand it, so we destroy it.
It's a tale as old as time.
Matheson really nails that in this book.
He does.
He takes this vampire story and turns it into something much bigger.
It's about prejudice.
About the stories we tell ourselves.
But to make sense of the world.
To justify our fears.
And that ending, when Neville realizes,
I am legend.
Chills, right?
It's like he finally gets it.
But it's too late.
He spent his whole life fighting to survive.
Fighting to stay human.
Only to become a monster in their eyes.
The irony is brutal.
It makes you think about our own world, doesn't it?
It does.
What legends have we created?
What stories are we clinging to?
Even when the evidence might suggest otherwise.
That's the real horror of I Am Legend.
It's not the vampires.
It's us.
It's the monsters we create out of fear and ignorance.
And the scariest part.
What's that?
We might be those monsters ourselves.
Ooh.
Right. Something to think about.
I Am Legend. More than just a vampire story.
A timeless exploration of what it means to be human.
And what it means to be a monster.
In a world that's always more complicated than we realize.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
I'm sure our listeners feel the same way.
I hope so.
Until next time, keep exploring those dark corners of literature.
And keep asking the tough questions.
And maybe, just maybe, we can learn to fear the monster a little less.
And understand each other a little more.
That's the goal, isn't it?
It's a good goal to have.